So I'm currently working on this game where you traverse through an obstacle course using parkour-like movement. In the last episode I pretty much got the basics of the movement settled in, and we established what this game is all about: speedrunning. I've really enjoyed following other speedrunning games like Trackmania on the side, looking into how players break the boundaries of the game to inch closer and closer to a good time. But to even get close to something like that in my own game, we need levels. And we don't just need any levels, we need good levels. So we're pretty much screwed because making levels is hard. But let's give it a go. So as I was making the mechanics for the movement itself, I started building out a few test areas to get the movement feeling right. So we can use some of those as a base for the levels. The entire game takes place in this military base, and I had sort of planned out a route the player would have to take, and then each level would be along that path. And there should probably be some kind of progression in so the levels would get harder and harder, and these early levels would then be there to introduce mechanics and so on. Now you might ask, why not design the levels first and then design the military base around those levels? And that's a really good question. Well, mostly it's because I kind of suck at making levels, and this game kind of depends on it, so that's not good. But one thing I find really difficult about making levels is that when you have nothing, it's kind of hard to start anywhere. It kind of feels like every level comes after something. It always builds on something, or it's set somewhere. So I thought by building the base itself first, I could give myself some limitation to design the levels within. And it kind of worked. I think the variation of tight and open spaces gave me different ideas for where the player might run, jump, and so on. And I think actually this strategy kind of worked. It definitely brought some flow into the level making process. But as I was looking around, everything was just looking a little bit drab. So we gotta bring in some visuals and talk about the aesthetics of the game. Up until this point, I'd pretty much been designing the levels using simple boxes, but I was beginning to block out a lot of them, and I realized I would have to essentially remake all the levels by hand if I kept designing the levels like this. So I needed something that was more aesthetic, that could help me design the levels. And once again, other games came to the rescue. Games like Portal and Trackmania feature level creation tools that consist of kit pieces, and many of the levels are essentially designed from that. So I needed something similar. I jumped over to Blender and built a box making tool on steroids using Blender's geometry nodes. This tool allowed me to convert simple geometry into nice looking textured assets with ease. And I could use all the old block out I had and simply convert it into good looking assets super quickly. And this is actually super essential, as my game is super dependent on good colliders. If you don't know about colliders are essentially invisible geometry around the visuals of an asset, and the colliders are what the physics of the game actually interacts with. I don't think it's talked about enough, but creating colliders is actually a huge effort and a really important part of game development. But this tool that I had made essentially let me make the visuals and the colliders at the same time, and then the blocks essentially became my kits to start building the levels. To add some extra flair, I also created these glass frame walls around everything to give the scene more layers of depth as you feel the outside when running through everything. Around the military base, I also added a bunch of stuff like some containers, some parked military fighters, and in the way distance I added these amazing mountains. They're totally fake though. I've also been thinking about adding a dynamic sun, so as you progress through the levels, maybe the day passes, which can add to each level's uniqueness or something like that. You're technically supposed to just focus on the road ahead, but adding this stuff just gives it a lot more atmosphere. And I think a key part of the atmosphere for this game is the feeling of being watched as you play through the levels. So let's talk about the overseers. So in this game, the idea is that you are in a training program that is being observed by some higher officials, and you as the player have to prove that you are good enough to progress in the program. And I thought there would be something really interesting in having the overseers be right next to you on a train-like cart, where they can all see you right then and there. I played around with this idea for a while, but in the end decided that it would be too much work, as I would have to make characters and such for all of them. And it became complicated fitting it into the level, but I still wanted their presence there somehow, so instead I decided to put them in a tower. And then I could bring some attention to the tower in the beginning of the game, showing the observation deck being raised up and such. And then I thought I could add a little camera drone that would fly around and film you as you went through the levels. But man, That was not working out super well. I wanted the robot to fly naturally but also follow the player's erratic movement, but I couldn't find a good solution, so I scrapped that too and just left the tower, which was probably for the better because the robot did end up becoming a little bit distracting when running around. And the same goes for the train card, but I'm still planning on adding some kind of voice that you hear as you are progressing. I would like someone commenting on your progress and pulling the story forward a little bit, so I'm currently working on a script for that, but it would be more fun to reveal that a bit later. However, one thing that the overseers have to track is your time. So let's talk about checkpoints. Because the game is all about speedrunning, I needed a way to mark out the different levels. So I created some checkpoints for the player to hit along the route and a goal at the end of each level. This is pretty much the setup you have in Trackmania, and they help make the level design more flexible, because I don't have to block off every path, as the player now has to hit the checkpoints to advance. And the player now has to clear checkpoints to unlock the final goal. I also gave each checkpoint a timer, and I decided to give this look where the numbers light up individual light bulbs and then they form the time kinda. This was a little bit overkill, as it actually ended up taking quite a lot of time to get everything set up. I needed a big sprite with all the numbers, then I needed to convert numbers into the UV coordinates for the textures, and I could probably have done something simpler, but I ended up really liking the result, and I think it brings a little bit of light and focus to the otherwise muted levels. At first I thought about having the time of your run only shown on the checkpoints to keep everything really grounded, but it wasn't really clear enough. So I had to get into making some UI user interface, and UI is the kind of thing that I don't really want to make it. It just feels like this thing that you have to make, but once I get into it, I obsess over it and tweak everything to be as streamlined as possible. So I created a timer on the left hand side with a bit of different information. In the top we have this timer that shows you the overall time from beginning to end. I think my idea for the game is that it can be speedrun in two ways, the whole game or each level. So the top timer is only active when you start from the very first checkpoint, and then you get a time there. Below that we got the stage number, which shows you what stage you are currently playing. And then below that is the best time you have done for that specific stage. And that acts as a really nice encouragement for you to try and beat. And then your active time will be right below that. And most likely this is the timer you'll be looking at the most when running through the levels. As I was playing through and testing my levels, it became clear to me that I needed a fast way to reset my position back to the checkpoints, because now every time I failed to hit a jump or hit a mark for a checkpoint or something, I had to run all the way back to the checkpoint or to the point where I could get up and then restart the run. But now I changed it so that you can hit R and it resets you back to the last checkpoint you cleared. And if you hit R again, you go to the previous one and you can actually reset yourself all the way back to the very beginning. But if you wanted to quickly jump between all the levels, it would be nice to have some sort of overview, a level selector of sorts. So I created a main menu, and right there on the menu you have this map of the whole facility. And here you can choose to fast travel between the different levels once you have unlocked them. And then I also made it so that each stage is marked with your best time for that level. And to add some additional encouragement and sense of achievement for the player, I also added these stars that you can win if you beat certain times, which you can see if you hover over the different stages. I didn't want to go for the traditional bronze, silver, gold kind of ranking, so I instead opted to give the player rankings based on the in-universe military rankings of the type of super soldier you are supposed to play as. It just felt a lot more fun to do it that way, and the design itself is this kind of pointed star, and to me they felt a little bit like throwing stars, so I wanted to give them a sharp sound when you won some. And I don't really know what it is about it, but trust me, it's just super satisfying receiving those stars. Generally I was making lots of progress, but then I started looking around the map and at some of the levels again, and yeah, stuff was looking empty and some of the levels still lacked something. So I guess let's talk about levels again. Something I realized from very level-based games like Trackmania, Portal, and especially Titanfall is that all the good levels always had one thing about them that made them memorable. Maybe a better word for it is a theme or something. Titanfall is a good example. They have this level in particular with an insane assembly line building houses, and though I remember the flow of movement being awesome, the simple fact that this was all happening on an assembly line just made it stand out to me. And then later in the game you have a special weapon that lets you flip platforms as you move your way through. And these really unique moments or setups just made the levels stand out. And in a really similar way, I wanted each level to stand out and have something memorable about them, and even better if it could fit into the actual level design. But achieving something like that is gonna be tricky. But it does give me more constraints for the level design, which makes it a lot easier. This could be a really simple thing like this level has no roof, or this level has a plane flying over your head as you make your way through it, or something really big like this giant spaceship firing off into the sky in the distance. All these ideas are kinda aesthetic, but in a way they could play into the theme of each level's design. Maybe the level that has no roof is very open in its design, reflected by the lack of a roof. Maybe the one with the fighter going over your head is about going really fast and flying a lot. And maybe the one with the big starship has something to do with one big massive jump or move that you have to make in the course. But I think this is something I want to explore more of in the future. In other news, I also went through the whole process of being certified to be a developer on Steam, so I can actually upload my game there and start making a store page and all those kinds of things. It'll probably be called The Conduit or something like that. And with that said, I hope that this video was useful and insightful. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. You can also leave a comment if you have anything to discuss or ask. And if you want to follow us in the future, then subscribe and hit that notification bell.